There is a man sitting alone in a cold, dimly lit room, with nothing but a torn coat on his back, a few cents in his pocket, and a hunger in his belly that had become his oldest companion. He had failed, not once, not twice, but dozens of times. Every door he knocked on seemed to shut harder than the last. Every dream he dared to whisper out loud seemed to crumble the moment he spoke it. And yet something inside this man refused to die. Something in him, quiet and stubborn and absolutely unreasonable, kept saying, "There has to be a way. There has to be a reason why some people rise and others stay down. There has to be a secret, a principle, a law that governs success the same way gravity governs falling objects." That man was Napoleon Hill. And what he discovered over the next 20 years of his life, after interviewing more than 500 of the wealthiest and most successful people in the world, including Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and Theodore Roosevelt, became one of the most extraordinary collections of wisdom ever assembled between two covers. He called it the Laws of Success. And today, we are going to walk through it together, not as a textbook, not as a checklist, but as a living, breathing conversation between you and the ideas that have quietly changed the trajectory of millions of lives. So settle in. This is going to take some time, and that is a good thing, because the ideas worth carrying with you never come in a hurry. Let us begin where Napoleon Hill began, with the question that most people never think to ask. Not what do I want, not how do I get rich, but who am I, and what do I believe about myself? Because Hill discovered something in those years of research that shook him to his core. He found that every single person he interviewed, every titan of industry, every man or woman who had built something from nothing, every person who had endured extraordinary failure and still come out standing, they all shared one thing. Not intelligence, not luck, not even education. What they shared was a definiteness of purpose, a clear, unshakable knowledge of what they were after and why. He called this the first law, the mastermind, the chief aim. And he was not talking about a vague wish or a casual preference. He was talking about something you could feel in your chest, something that woke you up before the alarm, something that made the opinions of critics feel like noise in the background of a song you were already singing. Think about the people in your own life who seem to move with a certain energy, who walk into a room and feel it differently, who talk about their work or their mission with something that sounds almost like reverence. That is not an accident of personality. That is the result of knowing, truly knowing what you are alive to do. And most people never find that, not because they are incapable, but because they never sit still long enough to ask the question honestly. Hill was very direct about this. He said that the starting point of all achievement is desire, not a mild preference, not a someday kind of wish, a burning, specific, consuming desire, the kind that keeps you up at night and pulls you out of bed in the morning. The kind that makes sacrifice feel less like loss and more like investment. And the first thing you must do, before anything else in this entire framework, is define that desire with absolute clarity. What do you want? Write it down. Give it a number, a date, a shape. Because the mind, Hill discovered, cannot work toward a blur. It needs a target. It needs something to organize itself around. And once you give it that target, once you plant that specific desire into your conscious mind and repeat it, revisit it, breathe life into it daily, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your mind starts to notice things it had always ignored. Opportunities that were always there suddenly become visible. Connections that would have seemed coincidental start to feel intentional. This is not magic. It is simply the mechanics of a focused mind doing what focused minds were built to do. Now, here is where Hill takes the first law deeper. He says that desire alone, without a plan, is just dreaming. And there is a very important difference between a dreamer and an achiever. Both start with a vision. But the achiever then translates that vision into a specific plan and begins executing that plan immediately, imperfectly, messily, but immediately. Because Hill understood something that most motivational speakers forget to mention. The plan will change, the road will shift, the details will evolve, but motion, even imperfect motion, creates momentum. And momentum, once started, has a way of carrying you further than you ever expected to go. He told the story of Edwin Barnes, a young man who had one burning desire to become a business partner of Thomas Edison. Barnes had no money, no connections, no relevant experience. He arrived at Edison's laboratory looking more like a tramp than a prospective business partner, but he had something that money could not buy and connections could not manufacture. He had a decision, made in the deepest part of himself, that he would accept nothing less than what he came for. He did not get the partnership immediately. He got a small job sweeping floors, and he kept his desire alive, not as a disappointment he was managing, but as a certainty he was working toward. Years later, he became exactly what he had declared he would become. not because fate was kind to him, but because he refused to let his definite chief aim be replaced by doubt, convenience, or the well-meaning advice of people who could not see what he saw. That story matters because it illustrates something Hill returned to again and again throughout his work. The people who succeed are not the people who avoid struggle. They are the people who decide, before the struggle begins, that the struggle will not stop them. They make that decision so completely, so firmly, that when the hard moments arrive, and they always arrive, the decision has already been made. There is nothing left to debate. This brings us to one of the most quietly powerful ideas in the entire book, the idea of self-confidence. Hill dedicated enormous attention to this, and not in the way most people mean when they talk about confidence. He was not talking about being loud or fearless or immune to self-doubt. He was talking about something much more specific. He was talking about the belief, earned through preparation and practice, that you are capable of handling what life puts in front of you. He noticed something troubling in the people he interviewed who had failed to rise. Almost universally, they had a habit of talking themselves out of their own potential before they ever gave it a real test. They would have a good idea and immediately begin listing the reasons it would not work. They would get close to an opportunity and then find a way to convince themselves they were not ready, not qualified, not the right kind of person. And Hill saw this as one of the most devastating forms of poverty a human being could experience. Not poverty of money, but poverty of self-belief. He created what he called a self-confidence formula, a set of statements to be read aloud daily until they were not just words but convictions woven into the fabric of how a person saw themselves. And the science behind why this works, though Hill could not have named it that way in his time, has since been confirmed again and again. The brain does not easily distinguish between what is vividly imagined and what is actually experienced. When you repeatedly tell yourself a story about who you are, your nervous system begins to organize itself around that story. Your behavior shifts, your choices shift, and eventually, your reality shifts to match the story you have been telling. This is not wishful thinking, this is neurology. This is how the brain works. And Hill was using it intuitively a century before the research caught up. But he was also very careful to pair self-confidence with something that kept it grounded. He called it the habit of saving. And he did not mean only money. He meant the habit of conservation, of building something steadily and deliberately, rather than spending everything you have, every resource, every ounce of energy, every burst of enthusiasm, in one dramatic gesture that leaves you depleted and starting over. The people who build lasting success, he observed, were the ones who understood compounding, who understood that small, consistent deposits into the right accounts, whether those accounts were financial, relational, intellectual, or physical, eventually produce results that seem disproportionate to the effort that produced them. Now, around this point in the book, Hill introduces an idea that many readers initially resist, because it asks something of them that is uncomfortable. It is the law of habit. And his argument is devastatingly simple. He says that you are right now the sum total of your habits, not your intentions, not your ambitions, your habits, the small, daily repeated patterns of thought and action that run largely on autopilot, below the level of conscious decision-making. And if you want to change your results, you do not need to change your dreams. You need to change your habits. He points out that most people understand this intellectually and do nothing about it, because changing a habit is uncomfortable in the short term, even when it is beneficial in the long term. The brain resists the unfamiliar. It prefers the well-worn path, even when that path leads somewhere you do not want to go. And so people stay stuck, not because they are lazy or weak, but because they underestimate the sheer gravitational pull of the habitual and overestimate their ability to resist it through willpower alone. Hill's answer was not more willpower. It was environment design, community, and repetition. He argued that you must surround yourself with people who already have the habits you want. You must structure your environment so that the right behavior is easy and the wrong behavior is inconvenient. And you must repeat the new pattern, consistently and without exception, until it becomes as automatic as the old one. This takes time. It takes patience. It requires you to be kind to yourself when you slip and firm with yourself when you want to quit. But it is, Hill insisted, the most reliable path from where you are to where you want to be. And this leads perfectly into what many people consider the most famous idea in all of Napoleon Hill's work, the mastermind alliance. The concept that a group of people, aligned around a shared purpose, operating in a spirit of harmony and mutual support, can generate a level of intelligence and creative power that no individual member of the group could produce alone. He described it as a third mind, something that comes into existence when two or more people coordinate their knowledge and effort in a spirit of perfect harmony toward a definite purpose. something that is greater than the sum of its parts. Hill had seen this in action with Carnegie, who famously built his empire not on his own intelligence, which he freely admitted was quite ordinary, but on his ability to surround himself with extraordinary people and coordinate their efforts toward a common vision. He had seen it in Ford, who similarly admitted that he did not need to know the answers himself as long as he could reach the people who did know the answers. And he saw it, in smaller and quieter ways, in every successful person he ever met. None of them had done it entirely alone. Every one of them had, at some critical point, found the right people and built the right alliances. This idea matters more today than it did when Hill wrote it, because we live in a world that has become simultaneously more connected and more isolated. We have more tools for communication than any previous generation, and many of us have never felt more alone in our efforts, more convinced that we have to figure it all out by ourselves. And the result is the same as it always has been when people try to go it alone: slower progress, more unnecessary pain, and a deeper susceptibility to the kind of doubt and discouragement that only deepens in isolation. Find your people. That is what Hill is saying. Find the people who are going where you are going, or who have already been there, and invest in those relationships with the same seriousness that you invest in your skills and your knowledge. Because a mastermind alliance is not just a support group, it is a strategic asset. It is in many cases the difference between the dream that stays a dream and the dream that becomes your life. Now we are somewhere around the 10-minute mark, and if you are still here, that tells me something about you. It tells me that you are the kind of person who takes ideas seriously, who believes that understanding something deeply is worth the time it takes. And I want to encourage you to keep that quality in yourself. It is rarer than it looks. And while we are here, if you are finding value in this conversation, please take a moment and hit that like button and subscribe to Audiobook Library. It sounds like a small thing, but it genuinely helps this channel grow, and it helps us keep bringing you content that is worth your time. Now, let us keep going. One of the most misunderstood sections of Hill's work is his treatment of imagination, because when most people hear that word, they think of fantasizing, of daydreaming, of the pleasant but essentially passive activity of picturing something nice. Hill meant something far more active and far more disciplined. He distinguished between two kinds of imagination: synthetic imagination, which takes existing ideas and combines them in new ways, and creative imagination, which taps into something deeper, what he called infinite intelligence, to generate genuinely novel solutions and ideas. He argued that every great invention, every breakthrough in any field, every business that changed an industry, had its origin not in a laboratory or a boardroom, but in someone's imagination. Someone who was willing to ask what if in a serious way, not as a passive daydream, but as an active inquiry. What if we did it differently? What if the limitation everyone accepts as permanent is actually just a habit of thinking? What if the thing everyone says cannot be done has simply never been tried by the right person with the right mind? Hill observed that imagination, like muscle, grows stronger with use and atrophies with neglect. And most people, by the time they reach adulthood, have spent years being told in 100 subtle ways to be practical, to be realistic, to stay in their lane. And the result is an imagination that has been systematically weakened to the point where it is barely functional. People stop asking what if. They start asking only what is. And that shift, from possibility thinking to probability thinking, is one of the quietest tragedies of adult life. He challenged his readers to dedicate time, deliberately and without apology, to exercising the imagination. To sit with a problem or a goal and simply ask, in as many ways as possible, how could this be done? Not whether it could be done. How? The word how is magic in a way that why and whether are not. Because how assumes the destination is reachable and simply asks for the route. And that assumption, held consistently, has a way of producing routes that the doubtful mind would never have found. Hill then moves into territory that many modern readers find surprising in a book about success. He talks at considerable length about enthusiasm. Not the performative kind, not the salesmanship kind, the genuine kind. The kind that comes from actually caring about what you are doing, from feeling in your body a sense of aliveness and engagement with your work. And he makes a case that enthusiasm is not just a pleasant emotional state. It is a force multiplier for everything else you do. He had noticed, across hundreds of interviews, that the people who achieved the most were almost never the people who were simply grinding through their obligations. They were the people who were, in some deep and real way, in love with what they were doing. They talked about their work with an energy that was almost contagious. They thought about it when they were not working. They dreamed about it. They brought a quality of attention to it that went far beyond what was technically required. And that quality of attention, that enthusiasm, produced a quality of work that ordinary effort simply could not replicate. He was also very practical about this. He acknowledged that not everyone begins their career doing work they love. Many people, especially early in life, are doing work that is primarily practical, work that pays the bills while the larger vision is still taking shape. And his advice for those people was not to wait until they find their passion before bringing enthusiasm. It was to find something, anything, within the work they are already doing that they can genuinely care about. One customer served well, one problem solved creatively, one skill developed deliberately, and to let that small spark of genuine engagement be the seed of something larger, because enthusiasm is also, Hill argued, deeply attractive to other people. Not in the social sense, although it is that too, but in the sense that it pulls resources, opportunities, and allies toward you in a way that flat, obligatory effort simply does not. People want to be around those who are alive to what they are doing. They want to invest in them, hire them, partner with them, help them. Enthusiasm creates a kind of gravity that cold competence alone cannot generate. Let us talk now about one of the most important and least celebrated ideas in the book, the practice of going the extra mile. Hill frames this as a law, not a suggestion, not an admirable quality that some exceptional people have. A law, as in a reliable principle that produces predictable results when applied consistently. And the idea is almost childishly simple. Do more than you are paid to do. Render more service than is expected. Bring more quality, more care, more attention to your work than the minimum required. Hill's argument for why this is a law rather than a nicety is grounded in something he observed relentlessly across all his interviews. The people who were most trusted, most promoted, most sought out for partnerships and opportunities were consistently the people who had a reputation for delivering more than they promised, for showing up when it was not strictly necessary, for caring about the outcome of their work beyond what their job description technically required. And that reputation, built slowly and without fanfare, became a magnetic force that drew extraordinary opportunity to them over time. He also pointed out the psychological effect of this practice on the person who maintains it. When you consistently do more than is required, you develop a relationship with your own work that is different from the person who does the bare minimum. You begin to take pride in what you produce. You begin to care about the quality of your effort in a way that transcends any single paycheck or contract. And that relationship with your own work is one of the most powerful forces for continued excellence that exists. There is also something worth noting about the competitive dimension of this idea. In any field, in any organization, the people who do the minimum required tend to cluster together. They set the floor. And that floor becomes, for many people, the ceiling. But the person who goes the extra mile, almost by definition, operates in a different category. They create a comparison that makes their value undeniable over time. And while that process is sometimes slow and occasionally frustrating, Hill is absolutely clear that it is reliable. It works, not sometimes, consistently. He follows this with an extended treatment of what he called pleasing personality. And this is an idea that has been both widely celebrated and widely misunderstood. Because when people hear pleasing personality, they often think of charm, of social smoothness, of the ability to make people like you in superficial ways. And while Hill certainly valued those qualities, what he was actually pointing to was something much more substantive. He was talking about the quality of character that makes people trust you, that makes them feel, after spending time with you, that they have been genuinely seen and valued. That makes them want to bring you into their most important projects and decisions. This is not about being agreeable to the point of spinelessness. Hill was very clear about that. He actually argued that a pleasing personality requires, among other things, the courage to be honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable. Because a person who will tell you only what you want to hear is pleasant in the short term and useless in the long term, and everyone eventually figures that out. What he was describing was more like integrity in the fullest sense of the word, a wholeness, a consistency between what you say and what you do, a quality of genuine interest in other people that is not manufactured or strategic but comes from a real belief that other people matter, that their experiences, their struggles, their dreams are as real and as important as your own. And when you carry that belief consistently, when it shows up in your behavior in small ways every day, it becomes one of the most powerful forms of influence available to a human being. Around this section of the book, Hill tells the story of a young man who had every technical qualification for a high-level position at a major company. His resume was flawless, his interview answers were textbook perfect, but something was off. He was technically brilliant and interpersonally cold. He talked at people rather than with them. He answered questions about his strengths without ever asking a question about what the company actually needed, and he did not get the job. The position went to someone with a slightly less impressive resume but a genuine quality of warmth and interest that made people feel, when they were around her, that she was on their side, that she cared about the outcome as much as they did. Hill used stories like this throughout his work to illustrate that the soft skills, the human skills, are never soft. They are often the deciding factor in a world where technical competence has become the baseline. Now, let us spend some time with an idea that Hill returns to again and again from many different angles. The idea of accurate thinking. He was troubled by something he observed in almost every failing enterprise he ever studied. People, well-meaning, intelligent, hard-working people, were making decisions based on incomplete information, on rumor, on opinion dressed up as fact, on emotionally satisfying narratives that happened to be wrong. And they were paying enormous prices for that habit. He made a distinction that he considered fundamental, the distinction between information and knowledge. Information, he said, is everywhere. It is abundant, easily acquired, and largely unreliable. Knowledge, true working knowledge of a subject, the kind of knowledge that allows you to act effectively in the real world, is rarer, harder to acquire, and far more valuable. And the habit of accurate thinking means, above all else, developing the discipline to insist on the latter before acting as if you have it. He was also deeply concerned about the human tendency to let emotion drive thinking, to decide what we want to believe and then construct a logic to justify it, to dismiss evidence that challenges our existing views and amplify evidence that confirms them. This is not a character flaw. It is a feature of human cognition that has been thoroughly documented by modern psychology. But it is also one of the most reliable sources of poor decisions and unavoidable failure. And Hill's prescription was simple, though not easy. Before acting on a belief about the world, ask yourself, how do I know this is true? What evidence supports it? What evidence challenges it? What would I need to see to change my mind? And then actually engage with those questions honestly. He also talked about the importance of the counsel of others, particularly as a check on our own blind spots. Not the counsel of everyone, not the chorus of casual opinion that surrounds us on all sides, but the counsel of people who are qualified by their experience and their results to have a view worth hearing. People who will tell you the truth even when it is not what you were hoping for. And the willingness to seek that kind of counsel and to actually listen to it is, Hill argued, one of the marks of a genuinely intelligent person. One of the most personally resonant ideas in the entire book, for me, is Hill's treatment of the law of compensation. It is one of those ideas that seems obvious when you first hear it and then slowly reveals itself to be much deeper than it initially appeared. The basic statement is this: the amount of compensation you receive in life, not just financial compensation, but all forms of return, respect, love, opportunity, influence, will be roughly proportional to the value you create for others. Not to the hours you work, not to the effort you expend, not to how hard you try, to the value you actually deliver. This is a challenging idea for a lot of people because it disconnects compensation from effort in a way that feels uncomfortable. Most of us were raised to believe that working hard is the thing, that if you show up and put in the hours and do your best, the results will follow. And Hill does not deny that effort matters. But he insists that effort directed without clear thinking about value creation is one of the most common and least examined sources of frustration and disappointment in the working world. He asked his readers to think very carefully about this question. Who benefits from what you do? How does what you do, the specific work you produce, make someone else's life better, easier, richer, safer, or more enjoyable? And how could you increase the value you deliver, not by working harder necessarily, but by thinking more carefully about what the person on the receiving end of your work actually needs? He illustrated this with a story of two salesmen selling the same product in the same market. The first salesman worked incredible hours. He made more calls, knocked on more doors, sent more follow-up letters than anyone else in the company. And he was chronically frustrated by his results. The second salesman worked considerably less, at least in terms of raw hours, but he spent an extraordinary amount of time, before any sales call, understanding the specific needs, concerns, and circumstances of the person he was about to talk to. And he tailored everything he said and did to address those specific needs. Not what his product did in general, but what his product would do for this particular person in their particular situation. His results were almost comically better than the first salesman's, not because he worked harder, but because he thought harder about value. Hill then brings in one of the book's most enduring ideas, the idea of decision-making. And his observation here is so consistent and so clearly documented across hundreds of interviews that it has the quality of a law rather than an observation. Successful people make decisions quickly and change them slowly. Unsuccessful people make decisions slowly and change them quickly. Read that again if you need to. Because it is worth sitting with. The successful people Hill interviewed did not make better initial decisions because they were smarter or better informed. They made them faster because they trusted their preparation, their values, and their judgment. They did not wait for perfect information, which never comes. They gathered what was available, applied their best thinking, and acted. And then, crucially, they did not reverse course at the first sign of difficulty. They stayed with the decision long enough to give it a real test, long enough to learn from the experience of implementing it, and they changed course based on evidence and reflection, not on fear or discomfort. The people who made decisions slowly and changed them quickly, on the other hand, were often people who did not fully trust their own judgment, who needed constant external validation, who were susceptible to the opinions of others in a way that made them chronically uncertain about their own direction. And because they never stayed with a decision long enough to actually learn from it, they never accumulated the kind of experiential wisdom that would have made their future decisions better. They stayed stuck in a loop of slow decisions and quick reversals, each one leaving them a little more confused than the last. Hill's prescription was to do the preparation, to build the knowledge base, to develop the values that would serve as a compass, and then to trust yourself enough to decide, to act, and to give the decision time to breathe before asking whether it was right. Now, there is a section of the book that I want to spend real time on, because it is perhaps the most practically actionable part of Hill's entire framework. His treatment of concentration and the habit of focused effort. He makes the case clearly and convincingly that the ability to focus the mind on a single task, to give it your undivided and sustained attention, is one of the rarest and most valuable skills a human being can develop. And it is growing rarer by the year. He observed, even in his own time, that most people lived in a state of chronic mental scatter. They spread their attention across a dozen different concerns, never giving any one of them enough focused energy to produce real results. They started things without finishing them. They thought about multiple problems simultaneously without solving any of them. And the result was a life that felt busy, even exhausting, but produced far less than the effort invested seemed to warrant. He argued that every faculty of the mind becomes more powerful when concentrated, that the same mental energy that, spread thin, produces mediocre results across many areas, can, when focused on a single target, produce extraordinary results in that area. He pointed to the way sunlight, diffused, merely warms a surface. Concentrated through a lens, it can set it on fire, and he used this as a metaphor for the relationship between scattered attention and focused attention. The practical implication is this: pick the most important thing, not the most urgent thing, the most important thing, and give it the best of your mental energy, your freshest hours, your most complete attention, before you allow any of the other demands of your life to claim your focus. Do this consistently, over months and years, and the compounding effect of concentrated effort will produce results that seem almost miraculous to those who have never practiced it. He also connected this to what he called the habit of doing more than is paid for, because concentration, real concentration, is itself a form of going the extra mile. It is doing more with the time you have than anyone else around you manages to do with the same amount of time, not through longer hours necessarily, but through deeper focus during the hours you have. Let us talk now about something Hill called the power of the allied brain. He was fascinated by what happens when human minds are genuinely aligned, not superficially cooperative, not politely agreeable, genuinely deeply aligned around a shared vision and a shared set of values. And he believed that this alignment unlocks something in human beings that could not be accessed any other way. A quality of collective intelligence and creative power that transcended what any individual could produce working alone. He had observed this firsthand in the relationship between Carnegie and his team. And he had seen it in smaller ways in every successful organization and partnership he studied. The key, he noted, was not just proximity or frequent communication. It was harmony, a genuine mutual respect and alignment of purpose that made the collaboration feel less like work and more like play, less like obligation and more like shared adventure. He was also very practical about the conditions required for this kind of alliance to form and be maintained. Harmony, he said, does not mean the absence of disagreement. It means a shared commitment to the truth, to the goal, and to each other's well-being that is strong enough to survive disagreement, strong enough to make difficult conversations feel like moments of growth rather than moments of threat. And he argued that building that kind of alliance requires above all the personal quality of generosity, the willingness to give more than you take, to credit others freely, to share the resources, the knowledge, the recognition, in ways that make the people around you feel valued and seen. This generosity, he found, was one of the most reliable predictors of who would and would not be able to sustain a genuine mastermind alliance over time. The people who were primarily focused on what they could extract from a relationship never managed to build the kind of deep trust that made real collaboration possible. The people who focused on what they could contribute, consistently and without keeping score, found that the alliance they built became one of the most powerful engines of their success. Now, we are moving into the later sections of the book, and Hill turns to something that many people find either inspiring or slightly mystical, depending on their temperament. The idea of the subconscious mind as a creative force. And I want to be clear about what he was and was not arguing here. He was not making claims about the supernatural. He was making a very specific and very practically verifiable claim about the relationship between conscious intention and subconscious processing. Here is what he observed. When you plant a specific, emotionally charged goal into your conscious mind and return to it repeatedly, something begins to happen below the level of your awareness. Your subconscious, which never sleeps, which processes information continuously and in parallel with everything else you are doing, begins to work on the problem. It begins to notice connections, generate associations, produce solutions that your rational, linear, conscious mind would never have found on its own. And these solutions surface, often at unexpected moments. In the shower, on a walk, in that quiet space between sleeping and waking. And if you are not paying attention, you miss them. If you are, you catch them. And the cumulative effect of catching those insights over months and years can be genuinely transformative. Hill recommended several practices for working with this process deliberately. Writing down your goals and reading them aloud with feeling at least twice a day. Spending time in quiet reflection, not passive daydreaming, but focused, receptive attention to what is arising from below the surface of conscious thought. Keeping a notebook nearby at all times to capture ideas before they evaporate. And developing the habit of trusting and then testing the insights that come from this deeper level of processing. He also talked extensively about the role of emotion in this process. He found that goals held with a strong emotional charge, goals that were connected to something deeply and personally meaningful, were processed by the subconscious with far more urgency and creativity than goals held purely intellectually. And this is why he insisted so strongly on the burning desire, not as a figure of speech, but as a literal description of the emotional temperature at which the subconscious works most effectively. Think about a problem you have been trying to solve for a long time, a creative block, a professional challenge, a relationship dynamic that has resisted all your conscious effort. Now ask yourself, when do your best ideas about that problem typically come? Probably not when you are sitting at your desk deliberately trying to think about it. More likely in the shower, on a run, in a conversation that started about something else entirely. That is your subconscious doing exactly what Hill was describing. And you can work with it more deliberately, more skillfully, if you understand and respect the process. Hill also addresses, honestly and directly, the role of failure in the lives of successful people. And his treatment of failure is one of the most honest and humanizing parts of the entire book, because he does not pretend that failure does not hurt. He does not minimize the real cost of a business that collapses, a relationship that ends, a dream that has to be set aside. He acknowledges all of that. And then he makes a distinction that changes everything. He says that failure is only permanent when you allow it to be. When you respond to it by contracting, by retreating, by deciding that the failure was evidence about your worth rather than information about your method. Temporary defeat, he argues, is not failure. Temporary defeat is the universe's way of telling you that your plan or your approach needs adjustment. It is feedback in the most fundamental sense. And the question is not whether you will receive that feedback. You will. Everyone does. The question is what you do with it. He told the story of a man who had built a successful business only to watch it destroyed by circumstances largely outside his control. A market shift, a change in regulation, a partner who turned out to be dishonest. The man was in his 50s. He had every reason, every socially acceptable excuse to decide that he was done. That he had tried and the world had been unkind and that was the end of his story. Instead, he did something that Hill found remarkable. He sat down with a piece of paper and wrote out, in as much detail as he could, every lesson the failure had taught him. Every insight about business, about people, about himself that he would not have had if the business had succeeded. And he discovered, by the time he was done writing, that he had more valuable knowledge than he had started with. That the failure, painful as it was, had educated him in ways that success never could have. And from that foundation of hard-won knowledge, he built again. And what he built the second time was better, more resilient, more wisely structured than anything he had built before. That story is not rare in Hill's research. It is the pattern. The people who build truly lasting success are almost never the people who had an easy early path. They are almost always the people who had significant early failure, who responded to that failure with curiosity and determination rather than shame and retreat, and who brought the lessons of that failure into everything they built afterward. There is something almost mathematical about this pattern. Failure, when engaged with honestly and without self-pity, deposits directly into the account of experience. And experience, accumulated over time, is one of the most valuable assets a human being can possess. More valuable than money in many ways, because money can be lost and experience cannot. What you have learned from living through something real, even something painful, is yours. It belongs to you, and no market crash, no partner's betrayal, no change in circumstance can take it from you. Hill then circles back, in the closing sections of the book, to an idea that runs through everything he has written. The idea of tolerance. And this might seem like an unusual topic in a book about success, but Hill considered it fundamental. He had seen, in his research, the extraordinary damage that intolerance does. To individuals, to organizations, to communities. The way it narrows the mind, closes off information, creates enemies where allies could have been, and produces a quality of rigidity that makes adaptation impossible. He made a distinction between having strong values, which he celebrated, and being intolerant of difference, which he considered one of the most reliable sources of failure. Because the world is genuinely, irreducibly diverse. People think differently, come from different places, have different experiences, hold different beliefs. And the person who can only work well with people who are essentially versions of themselves is permanently limited in who they can learn from, who they can partner with, and ultimately in what they can build. Tolerance, as Hill described it, is not passivity. It is not the absence of conviction. It is the intellectual and emotional maturity to hold your own views firmly while remaining genuinely curious about the views of others. To be confident enough in your own identity that you do not feel threatened by difference. And to understand, practically, that the perspectives most different from your own are often the ones most worth seeking out, because they are the ones most likely to reveal the blind spots you cannot see from where you are standing. He also talks, in this context, about the importance of what he called the golden rule. And he is not using this as a religious phrase, but as a strategic principle. He argues that treating people as you would wish to be treated is not merely a moral nicety. It is a practical strategy for building the kind of reputation and the kind of relationships that produce durable success. Because people remember how you made them feel. They remember whether you were honest with them, whether you respected their time, whether you followed through on what you said you would do. And those memories accumulate over time into the reputation that either opens doors for you or closes them. He was struck in his research by how consistently the most successful people he interviewed were also the most genuinely generous and honest in their dealings with others. Not as a coincidence, as a cause and effect relationship. The quality of character that makes a person trustworthy is the same quality that makes them worth trusting with large responsibilities. And the world, imperfect as it is, has a reliable tendency to eventually route large responsibilities toward the people who can be trusted with them. And so we come finally to the thread that ties all of these laws together. The thread that Hill wove consciously and deliberately through every chapter, every story, every principle in the book. And it is this: your outer world is a reflection of your inner world. Not perfectly, not instantly, not without the interference of circumstance and luck and the choices of other people, but reliably, over time, with enough consistency to function as a law. The state of your finances reflects, more than you might want to admit, the state of your thinking about money. The quality of your relationships reflects the quality of the attention and care you bring to them. The level of your achievement reflects the clarity of your purpose and the consistency of your habits. The respect you receive from others reflects, in large measure, the respect you have for yourself. This is not a comfortable idea. It is a challenging one. It asks you to look at the results in your life not as things that happened to you, but as things that, in some significant sense, you participated in creating. And that is difficult to sit with, but it is also enormously empowering, because if your results are, in significant part, a product of your thinking and your habits and your choices, then changing your results is also within your power. Not immediately, not without effort, not without the kind of struggle that builds character and earns wisdom, but within your power nonetheless. And that possibility, the possibility that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is bridgeable, not by luck or circumstance, but by your own deliberate growth and effort, is one of the most energizing ideas a human being can encounter. Hill ends his great work not with a triumphant declaration, but with a quiet challenge. He asks his reader to take an honest accounting, not a harsh one, not a self-punishing one, but an honest one. To look at the 17 laws he has outlined, and to ask, genuinely and without defensiveness, which of these am I practicing consistently? Which am I neglecting? Where is the gap between what I know and what I do? And then he asks the reader to choose one law, just one, and to begin practicing it today with whatever resources are currently available in whatever circumstances currently exist. because one of the most consistent findings of his entire 20 years of research was this: the people who ultimately achieved extraordinary things were not the ones who had a perfect plan from the beginning. They were the ones who started where they were, with what they had, and kept moving. They adjusted as they learned. They added tools as they grew. They built the plane while they were flying it, to use a modern metaphor. And the starting was the thing. The willingness to begin, imperfectly and without all the answers, was the single most reliable predictor of who would eventually arrive somewhere worth arriving. There is a quiet power in that, a democracy in it. It does not say that success belongs to the brilliant or the privileged or the particularly fortunate. It says that success belongs to the consistent, to the willing, to the person who can look at the gap between where they are and where they want to be, and respond not with paralysis or resentment, but with curiosity and intention. Who can say, "I do not know everything I need to know yet, and that is all right, because I am willing to learn, and I am going to begin learning today." Napoleon Hill spent 20 years of his life gathering these principles because he believed with everything he had that the difference between a life of quiet desperation and a life of genuine fulfillment was not fixed by birth or by circumstance. That it was the result of principles that could be learned, practiced, and applied by any human being willing to do the work. He had seen it too many times, across too many different kinds of people and circumstances, to believe otherwise. And reading his work today, a century after it was first assembled, what strikes you most is not how much has changed, but how much has not. The principles he articulates are not historical artifacts. They are not relics of a particular time or culture. They are descriptions of how human beings work, of what the mind does when it is focused versus scattered, of what character does when it is tested, of what consistent effort, intelligently directed, produces over time. These things have not changed. They will not change. Because they are not about the world, they are about us. So here is the question that this extraordinary book leaves us with. Not what do successful people do, though it answers that thoroughly. But who are you becoming every day through the choices you make and the habits you maintain and the thoughts you entertain? Because the answer to that question, accumulated across months and years, is what your life will look like when you arrive at the future you are currently building. Make it something worth arriving at. You have every tool you need. You have these principles. You have whatever circumstances you are in right now, which are the raw materials and not the verdict. You have the choice, always the choice, of how you will respond to what life puts in front of you. And you have the extraordinary privilege of being alive in a moment when the wisdom of those who came before you, hard-won and honestly recorded, is available to you anytime you choose to reach for it. That is what Napoleon Hill gave the world. Not a formula for getting rich. A framework for becoming the kind of person whose life, and whose work, and whose relationships reflect the full possibility of what a human being can be when they show up, consistently and intentionally, for the life they are living. That is worth your time, that is worth your attention, and it is worth beginning. Today, we have covered a lot of ground together in this conversation, and if you made it all the way through, I mean that genuinely, that is not something most people do. Most people start and drift. You stayed. That tells me something about you that I hope you are telling yourself too. If this summary added something to your day, to your thinking, to your sense of what is possible, please hit that like button and subscribe to Audiobook Library. Every like and every subscription genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are looking for exactly this kind of content. It costs you nothing and it means everything for the work we are trying to do here. So if you are willing, take 10 seconds and do that now. And before you go, we have a whole library of book summaries and audio content right here on this channel, covering some of the most important and most fascinating books ever written on success, psychology, philosophy, human potential, and the art of living well. Please take a look through our other videos, explore the library, find the next idea that is waiting to change something in you. We put real care into every single one, and we think you will find something worth your time. Until next time, keep moving, keep learning, and keep showing up for the life you are building. It is worth it. And so are you.